It's official. Texas is back. Back enough to where the Carolina Panthers decided they didn't need one, but two Longhorns on their roster in 2024. What are the Panthers getting in Jonathon Brooks and Ja'Tavion Sanders? I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Watch the show and subscribe to the show over on YouTube for free or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On today's show, we're going to have a guest, Jonathon Davis. He's the host of Locked On Longhorns, covering the University of Texas athletics, and I'm sure primarily Texas football, which is officially back. The Longhorns won the Big 12 last year, went to the playoff. They had a bunch of guys get drafted. Xavier Worthy went to the Chiefs in the first round. Adonai Mitchell went to the Colts in the second round. Here in Carolina, we got Jonathon Brooks and we got Ja'Tavion Sanders. A great year for the Longhorns, who are headed to the SEC officially on July 1. So Texas, it's officially back enough to where the Panthers, they needed not just one Longhorn, but two from a prolific offense. And I'm curious, what is Carolina getting in Jonathon Brooks, who I believe once he's healthy from the torn ACL, which he should be cleared by July 1, that he is going to be RB1 here in Carolina at some point this season. It may start up being Chuba Hubbard, but based on what Dave Canales said about versatility, Chuba Hubbard's not that. Rashad Penny's not that. Miles Sanders, he's not that. You know who is? The guy they just traded up into the second round to get, that being Jonathon Brooks. You don't trade up into the second round at 46 to get a running back and not have that guy be your primary bell cow heading into this upcoming season. So we'll see how things develop once Jonathon Brooks is healthy. Ja'Tavion Sanders, love this pick. The Panthers were not able to procure any of the three tight ends there in Seattle. Noah Fant, he stayed in Seattle. We watched Will Dissly go down to L.A. and also watch Kobe Parkinson head down to L.A. So those guys are sharing the same building, but playing for different teams. Panthers not able to get either one of those players, and then whoever else they might have been interested in at the tight end position, it did not work out. They needed to get someone in the draft. Would have loved to have seen, of course, a guy like Brock Bowers, had he been available, but wasn't available, was never going to happen. Ben Sinnott from Kansas State, he went ahead of Ja'Tavion Sanders, but sitting there pick 101, wanted to see it once day 3 of the draft began, and that's who the Carolina Panthers got. Wasted no more time in addressing the tight end position, adding him to Tommy Trimble, Andy and Thomas in that tight end room. I think that is a great trio for Carolina as far as, well, let's not say great. It is an upgrade as far as what they had on the roster. Needed a pure pass catcher. Now he's paired with two veterans, a guy who the book on him is he's struggled when it comes to run blocking, but you got Ian Thomas to do that. You got Tommy Trimble to do that, and Tommy can help out as a tight end too in the pass game. Better scenario for the Panthers heading into 2024 as they try to raise up what has been the league's worst tight end group for the last 4 or 5 years or so since Greg Olsen dealt with foot injuries and departed here in Carolina. So let's not waste any more time. Let's bring in Jonathon Davis, the host of Locked On Longhorns, now to tell you what the Panthers are getting in Jonathon Brooks and Ja'Tavion Sanders. All right, back here as promised, Jonathon Davis. He is the host of the Locked On Longhorns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Check him out on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, just like you check out Locked On Panthers on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Follow him on Twitter at JohnzoBall. Jonathon, how are you doing today, man?
Doing great. Getting to the what? Yeah, I'm doing great. Doing great. Just had the NFL draft end. Anxiously waiting for college football, but you know how time flies. So before you know it, it'll be August. We'll have college football back, and then it'll be September, and we'll have the National Football League back. So it's super cool to have this connection. Football could bring us together. Locked On could bring us together, and we could talk University of Texas, and we could talk the Carolina Panthers.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to do that as a Carolina Panthers drafted 2 Longhorns in this past year's draft. Jonathan Davis, the running back out of Texas, and Jatavion Sanders, the tight end out of Texas. And kind of nice for you too, Jonathan, where you think about it. We do have this gap in between things actually happening as far as on the field product, at least of college football. You guys got the transfer portal that seems to never be ending. So I guess that just closed up at the beginning of May. But I'm excited to talk to you about these 2 guys joining Texas or joining Carolina from Texas. Deshaun Jameson, as we talked about before we even got up here, he's also a fellow Longhorn on the roster. Let's start off with Jonathan Davis and your thoughts on him and or Jonathan Brooks, rather. You're Jonathan Davis, and your thoughts on what Jonathan Brooks can bring here to Carolina. Texas has had a long line of great running backs: Earl Campbell, Jamal Charles, Ricky Williams, most recently Bijan Robinson. It looks like Jonathan Brooks is among that line. When watching him at Texas, how did you compare him to some of the Texas greats of old?
All right, so 2 things. You did say Jonathan Davis twice, so I appreciate you, for blessing me with way more athleticism than I would ever have, right? Also, I believe Deontay Foreman played for the Panthers at one point, right?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Former Texas Longhorn, former Doak Walker Award winner, best running back in college. So you have to mention him in that breath as well, Carolina
Absolutely.
Panthers. When you talk about what Jonathan Brooks means to the Carolina Panthers, what the Carolina Panthers are getting in Jonathan Brooks, I solely believe that at some point, maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, we'll be talking about Jonathan Brooks as one of the best running backs in the National Football League. We'll be talking about him as a perennial All-Pro candidate. I had Max Chadwick on Locked On Longhorns from Pro Football Focus last week, and I asked him, out of the 11 players drafted from the University of Texas in this past cycle, who do you think will have the best career? And he said Jonathan Brooks as well. When I look at Brooks, it's just a complete running back, right? And it's crazy that at one point he was running back 3 on the depth chart, right? You mentioned, running back with Bijan and Roschon Johnson and then Jonathan Brooks. But from the moment he stepped on campus, from the moment he got opportunity, even as running back 3, you saw something special, right? Just such a unique running style with the patience. He's just such a joy to watch. A lot of people have compared him to Le'Veon Bell. I don't think he really runs like Le'Veon Bell, but you could say he has the patience of a player like Le'Veon Bell. Really, just the vision, could sit back and set up his blocks. But like I said, just a complete running back, right? You talk about the speed, and it's deceptive, right? Like when you're watching him on film or on tape, it doesn't look like he's running that fast, right? But then you see nobody can catch him, and you just have to reasonably assume that he's running that fast, right? The power, right? But not just pure power in terms of like a bruiser, but contact balance, right? You're bouncing off of him, right? You know what I mean? Or he's bouncing off of you, able to stay up. Like I said, the patience, the vision, the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He is just a complete running back, and you're getting a running back that didn't have a ton of tread on the tires in college. Right now in high school, he was the man, right? At some small, I don't know if it's 2A or 3A, but it was a real small high school. He had like 73 touchdowns his senior year. Like he did everything. It was one of those type of schools. So a lot of tread on the tires in high school, but then he sits behind Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson at the University of Texas. The first 2 games of the season, he doesn't start because 5-star true freshman Cedric Baxter comes in, and then he gets hurt the 10th game of the season. You know what I mean? So, hopefully he comes back, better than ever, but he didn't have a ton of tread at the University of Texas. So you're getting a fresh running back in the National Football League who, like I said, I think in 3 or 4 years, he'll be in that conversation for best player at his position in the National Football League.
Yeah, 51 carries his first 2 seasons behind Bijan and Roschon. Then I believe only 235 carries total during his time at Texas. It's interesting that someone would have the thoughts that he will be a perennial Pro Bowl All-Pro player in a couple of years' time, and he was sitting behind 2 current NFL backs, one of them in the division with Bijan down in Atlanta, and Roschon, I believe, is up in Chicago with the Bears. Why was he not able to get on the field until this past year? And really, you mentioned Cedric Bailey, the 5-star freshman. He was the guy for Bama, at least week 1. Week 2 at Alabama, well, not for Bama, for Texas. Week 1, he was not the guy. Week 2, he ended up being the guy, especially running out the clock against Bama in that 4th quarter, where it really became that point where it's like, all right, Jonathan Brooks might be this guy. What took him so long, you think, in your opinion, to he didn't play the first 2 years. Why don't you think he was able to get past those guys if he has the kind of talent that at least that your guest had thought last week?
Yeah, I think, it's just more so about the guys that you're talking about in front of him, right? When you bring in, Bijan Robinson, when you brought him in 2020, because, Jonathan Brooks didn't come in until the 2021 class, right? He was actually, recruited and signed to Tom Herman, but didn't play under Tom Herman at all because that's the year we transitioned to Steve Sarkisian. So when you had Bijan Robinson came in 2020, right? I think, he was a 5-star, I don't want to say more talented than Jonathan Brooks, but he was the guy, right? By the time Jonathan Brooks even stepped on campus, right? And then you're talking about Roschon Johnson, who was a really good running back himself, right? I believe 4th-round pick to the Chicago Bears last year. Yeah. But he was also the emotional leader of the football team, right? So it was like Bijan Robinson was running back one, the all-world, type running back, Reggie Bush clone in a bigger body, right? And then you got Roschon Johnson, who was the emotional leader of the team, but also a very, very good college running back as well. So just naturally, because both of those players had already been on campus before Jonathan Brooks and had defined roles, he was relegated to the running back 3 role, not because of what he couldn't do, but because what the two guys in front of him could do, right? And then when he got his opportunity, when they moved on to the National Football League, you saw the Doak Walker Award favorite until he tore his ACL in the TCU game. So I think it was just more so you had 2 veteran running backs in front of him who were NFL caliber players, obviously, because they're in the National Football League now, and he had to just wait for his opportunity. But when he got his opportunity, he certainly didn't look back, and that's why he was the first running back drafted this season.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it tells you where Texas is at now with talent, where they weren't a couple years ago when they didn't have anyone drafted. It kind of reminds me of Ohio State, which always puts out some great wide receivers. You go back a couple years ago, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, all 3 of those guys are ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., who was just selected as the top wide receiver in this draft. So it's a great spot where Texas is at now, especially under head coach Steve Sarkisian as they head into the SEC. One thing that Dave Canales, head coach here in Carolina, talked a lot about when it comes to Jonathan Brooks, not necessarily his running style, but his versatility as a pass catcher. How much is he going to be able to provide there for Carolina heading into his career here in Charlotte?
I think more than we saw at the University of Texas, honestly. We were using him, but our quarterbacks didn't check the ball down a lot, especially Quinn really didn't check the ball down a lot, maybe in towards later in the season. And when we would throw the ball to Jonathan Brooks, a lot of times it would be like those designed running back screens or, going through your progressions, nothing there, checking the ball off. I think you have the opportunity in Carolina to do some more with him. I don't think he's just like a pure, route runner. He's not a Christian McCaffrey. Like you're just going to put him in the slot and say, he's going to catch 100 balls a year. But I do think he can be utilized a little bit more out of the backfield more often than he was at the University of Texas. Like I think that's something that we'll see more of in the National Football League than we saw at the 40 Acres or in Austin, Texas. And when you look at it, you have a young quarterback in Bryce Young, right? You're trying to figure out if Bryce Young is the guy. You're trying to figure out what makes Bryce Young comfortable. And I think the organization, I know they catch a lot of flack top down from the owner, down to the the GM and everybody in the front office, right? But I think they did such a great job of, okay, we need to find out if Bryce Young is the guy. So how do we do that? We surround him with weapons. Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, and then Jonathan Brooks. So I think, I was about to say Byron Murphy. I think Bryce Young, right? You know what I mean? As a young quarterback, now he has a security blanket, right? If there's nothing there, he doesn't have to force the ball down the field. He's a very accurate and careful quarterback already. Now you have a explosive player. Like I said, I think one of the best in the league at his position. We'll be saying that in a few years, that you can dump the ball off to and get positive yards and maybe even get explosive plays. So I think he's going to be utilized more in the passing game than he was at the University of Texas. I think he'll bring a lot more in that regard to the National Football League, and he'll be such a good security blanket for a young quarterback in Bryce Young to help him move the ball down the field and make explosive plays.
Yeah, when you have that receiving trio headlined by Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, and then you add in Jatavian Sanders, if I'm Quinn Ewers or even Malik Murphy in those situations, I'm probably not checking it down to the running back either. One more question here on Brooks before we head over to talk about Jatavian Sanders on the other side. He goes down with that ACL injury. Was it fair to say up until that point, he was arguably the most important player on that offense for Texas. I still understand they won the Big 12 and got to the playoffs. There was some legitimate concern, I would imagine, in Austin, even outside of Austin, just being an observer of the sport, about where Texas was going to be able to go with not having Brooks for the rest of that season.
Yeah, I was definitely screaming all year that he was a dark horse Heisman candidate, right? And like all year it was, Quinn Ewers. You know how it is. Like we prop up the quarterback. So like all year it was Quinn Ewers. If Texas keeps winning, Quinn has a chance at the Heisman. And I'm like, we got to talk about Jonathon Brooks, like the running back that's averaging 160 yards on the ground. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, why are we poo-pooing that? So I was talking all year about him being a Heisman candidate. And then, obviously when he went down, you have very talented players in the room, Jaden Blue and Cedric Baxter, who I think were able to, run at a high level for us over the next 4 games. But I don't think they brought the same juice that Jonathon Brooks would have. I think it's fair to question if Texas has Jonathon Brooks in that Washington game where Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue both fumbled, 1 fumble apiece. Does Texas make it to the national championship game against Michigan, right? So I do think Texas lost a lot, right? Losing Jonathon Brooks down the stretch, right, in their best season in over a decade. And you can say we had Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue, we were just fine. But as a Jonathon Brooks truther, I don't think that's the case, right? I do think that the ceiling of the Texas football team last year was limited a little bit when Jonathon Brooks went down with that ACL.
Yeah, and you saw just how well they ran the ball against Washington in that game, too. Like, the passing game wasn't really doing much. AD was MIA until that last-minute touchdown, the false hope drive that they had at the end of the game. And I don't know where Xavier Worthy was that night in New Orleans. So, sorry to bring up bad memories for you there, Jonathan. But, yeah, Jonathon Brooks, had him there that evening, maybe it would have been Michigan and Texas or in the national championship game. But let's take a quick pause. Let's come back and talk about the other Texas Longhorn who's set to be a Carolina Panther, Ja'Tavion Sanders. JT Sanders fulfilling a massive need as a pass-catching tight end in Carolina. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because of eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Back here on Locked On Panthers, Julian Council, joined by Jonathan Davis, the host of the Locked On Longhorns podcast, talking about the 2 recent Texas Longhorns who have now joined Carolina via the 2024 NFL Draft. Jonathon Brooks, the running back of the Panthers, traded up into the second round at 46th overall to get. And now we're going to talk about Ja'Tavion Sanders, JT Sanders, the tight end they took 101 overall to begin day 3 of the NFL Draft, the beginning of the 4th round. And personally, Jonathan, my favorite pick that this team made in the draft. Since Greg Olsen went down with those back-to-back years of the foot injuries, the Panthers have not been able to replace him. I'm not sure whether JT Sanders is going to replace Greg Olsen now or in the future, but he has the potential to be a high-level pass and catching tight end here in Carolina and in the NFL, in my opinion. So one of my favorite picks of the draft, maybe my favorite pick of the draft for the Panthers that they made. What are the Panthers getting in Ja'Tavion JT Sanders?
Just a freak athlete, first of all. I'm not sure, if you or how many, Carolina Panthers fans know, but coming out of high school in Texas, he was an athlete, right? He was not a tight end. He was an athlete. And the conversation was, is Ja'Tavion Sanders going to play tight end or is he going to play edge rusher? Right. And when Steve Sarkisian got the job at the University of Texas, he said, oh, yeah, I'm playing tight end. And now he's the tight end that, the Carolina Panthers just drafted in the 4th round. But like I said, 3 years ago, we were trying to decide if he was a edge rusher or a tight end. So that tells you he's just a freak athlete. I mean, super strong hands. There's one play in particular I'm sure Carolina Panthers fans have seen. I can't remember who it was against, but he literally is like not even looking, catches the ball with one hand, and it just gets blasted, right? Gets blasted across the middle of the field and just holds on and just stands up like he didn't even get touched. And right. And that's who you're getting in Ja'Tavion Sanders, the modern tight end, right? What you want in the modern tight end is the ability to be a mismatch week in and week out, right? You want that type of player that when he's going against safeties and corners, he's too big, he's too physical. And when he's going against linebackers, God forbid you drop an edge rusher against him, right? He's too quick and he's too agile and he's too explosive, right? That's the type of player you want, that George Kittle, that Darren Waller, right? That Mark Andrews, that Travis Kelce type player. Jatavian Sanders can fit into that mold. So I think you're getting a really versatile tight end. You know, obviously there's some question marks about the way that he tested with the 40-yard dash and, you know, the bench press at the pro day with only 8 reps. But just in terms of pure talent, just in terms of the tape and what he was able to do over 2 years at the 40 acres, like I said, a modern tight end, a freak athlete, super strong hands. And when he's locked in and when he's dialed in, I think he can put himself in that class of tight ends I mentioned earlier, those Pro Bowl, all-pro tight ends. Once again, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, et cetera, Sam Laporta. And I know that's, you know, high pressure, right? High praise, high expectations for a player like Jatavian Sanders. But when you watch the tape, you see resemblance of players like that. Like I said, when he's locked in, when he's dialed in, he's among the best at his position.
Yeah, if you went to Iowa, I'd be 100% sold, considering like all this are Iowa tight ends for the most part. And the one thing I'm not concerned about when it comes to a tight end is their 40 time. Wide receiver, corner, those kind of skill positions, yes. And he is an athlete. He's a skill position kind of player, the way they're likely going to utilize him early on in his career. I'm not overly concerned about that. I've watched him play. He can move. Everything will be just fine. I don't need straight line speed from a tight end. Now, the one concern that people have is his blocking ability, which may go into the limited reps there on the bench press. And it's good to hear now because you bring up the fact that he was an athlete coming out of high school, choosing between edge and tight end. And once Stark comes in, one of the best play callers in college football, probably makes a lot of sense to go on the offensive side of the ball if you're Jatavian Sanders, which is a big reason why he's probably in the NFL right now. How far along do you think he is there? Because that's a concern a lot of people had, but it makes sense that he would be kind of slow with the blockings part since he hadn't played tight end until he got to Texas.
Yeah, I thought, 2022, his first year, because he came to campus in 2021, but didn't play. All right, like any offensive snaps, at least that I remember, but definitely like didn't have a reception or anything. So he only played his sophomore and junior year, right? 2022 and this past season, 2023. And I thought 2022, his first year as a tight end when he broke onto the scene, I thought he was really good as a run blocker. Maybe some regression in 2023. He did deal with some injuries, and blocking is like defense in basketball. It's about want to, right? Do you want to or not, right? A lot of that is just grit and effort. So I do think, the injury maybe hindered him a little bit. Obviously, it's a contract year that can go both ways. And, maybe you're not as nasty in the trenches as you were when you were trying to prove yourself. But, I do think he came on the scene really well in 2022 as a blocker. Like I said, maybe a little regression there last year just in terms of some injuries and, maybe a little less want to on the way out of the 40 acres. But I do think he has the potential to be a really good blocker, right? To be an edge rusher, you have to know how to use your hands, right? I think that's half the battle with blocking, hand placement and leverage, right? You have to know that on the defensive side of the ball as well. And like I said, I remember him being a really good blocker in 2022. I think the thing with Jatavian Sanders is, and I'm not saying he has effort issues or anything like that. I think it's more consistency issues, right? Like when he's locked in and when he's dialed in, I think he can be an exceptional blocker and also that great receiver, like that great dual threat combo that's just impossible to deal with at the tight end position. But once again, blocking is about consistency. It's about effort and it's about want to. And you have to get on the line, right? Or, wherever you're lined up and you have to want to do it every snap, right? You have to want to bang heads every snap and open up holes for Jonathon Brooks or whoever's back there at running back or whoever's going to be catching the ball on those wide receiver screens and quick passes. So I think he has all the potential in the world, all the talent in the world, all the ability in the world to be a great blocker. I think the question is the want to.
Yeah, and I'm not overly concerned about that. Right now, he comes into a tight end room with Tommy Trimble and Ian Thomas, whose primary jobs is going to be blocking, so they can at least fill that role. It may make things a little bit predictable for Carolina offensively when Sanders is out there, just knowing that this is their pass catcher, so maybe watch out for him. I think down the road, Pat McPherson as a tight end coach coming from Seattle, where there's been a multitude of really good blocking tight ends in that offensive scheme that Pete Carroll had as a defensive coach the last 13 years, where I'm not super concerned about him moving forward. Last thing here, you brought up Roschon Johnson earlier, being kind of the heart and soul of that Texas offense when he was there back in 2022. Last year, when you have Ewers, you have Brooks, you got Sanders, Worthy, Mitchell. Who kind of was that vocal kind of guy? Trying to get an understanding of the personalities that Brooks and Sanders potentially are bringing here to Carolina.
Yeah, I think, when you get to the point you are with the University of Texas where you have 5 stars all over the roster, and you just got crazy talent and you start to win the way we do, I think it requires more than one leader, right? Especially when you're not talking about a 53-man roster, you're talking about 100 players, right? 85 scholarship players and, 20 walk-ons. So I think we had multiple leaders. Jordan Whittington probably is the first one that comes to mind, a 6th-round pick to the Los Angeles Rams. He came onto campus in 2019, I believe, so he had been here a while, been through a lot. Okay. He was a vocal leader for us last year. Kelvin Banks, who will be a top 10 pick next year in the NFL draft, maybe the best left tackle in college football this year. So Carolina Panthers fans, if you haven't heard of Kelvin Banks and, you're big draft junkies, big college football fans, make sure you check him out. I think he really grew as a leader last year. Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, right? Leading by example as All-Americans, but also, being veterans on the team and leading up front. A player you're going to have to go against in your division. Our middle linebacker, Jalen Ford, who just returned home to New Orleans to the Saints. I saw that face. You know what I mean? He like, thanks. Yeah, I got you. But, Jalen Ford was a really good, leader and linebacker for us as well. So, you don't win 12 games. You don't make it to the college football playoffs. You don't win your conference without having a team full of great leadership. And I think we had that last year. As far as Jatavian Sanders and, Jonathon Brooks, I think those are going to be lead by example guys, right? I think Jatavian Sanders definitely can be a raw guy, but I think Jonathon Brooks is going to be a more so like, hey, look at me. I'm one of the best players in the league. Do what I do, right? And you'll be one of the best at your position as well. So I think Jonathon Brooks is going to be a lead by example guy. And I think you're going to watch what he does on a daily basis and say, that's how I need to, that's what I need to do to be a professional in this league. I think he's going to step in day one, just like Bryce Young did from day one, and know how to be a professional in this league. And it's going to rub off on everybody on that roster.
Love to hear it. He should be running back one, Jonathon Brooks. Listening to what Dave Canales had to say about versatility, looking at the guys on the roster who aren't versatile, when he's healthy, hopefully he'll be ready to go. July 1 apparently is when he's supposed to be cleared. Training camp's not until July 25th, and then season doesn't start until September. But if he's healthy, he, in my opinion, will be the top running back on the depth chart here in Carolina. And then Sanders, he's going to have a role because the other guys, they can't do what he can do. So you're going to be watching a lot of Panther football, I think, Jonathan, and hopefully you'll be watching the Panthers not lose and not watching an inept offense, which we've been watching the last couple seasons here.
I was about to say, I got to watch Bijan. I got to watch Jalen Ford with the Saints. I got to watch, Deshaun, JT, and JB with the Panthers. So I used to live in Georgia, and I used to watch a lot of NFC South then. So I'm right back in the mix now, because of the University of Texas. I'll be definitely watching a lot of NFC South this season.
Yeah, if there's any doubt out there, folks, Texas is back. Sark's got him back there, had him to the 14 playoff last year, headed to the SEC in a better spot than their arch rival OU heading into that conference. And Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, I don't know. I'm very interested to see what happens there. I'm not the biggest Ewers fan, but it's kind of crazy because like Ewers had a perfect recruiting rating on 24/7 and did what you needed him to do last year, and people are still like, give us Arch Manning. So it should be fun to track over on Locked On Longhorns with Jonathan Davis.
Great problems to have, for sure. Great problems to have. When your 5-star perfect rated quarterback is getting asked to be put on the bench for your other 5-star perfect rated quarterback, Texas is in a good spot.
And Ewers is from Texas, too. You would think that's the guy that everyone in the state of Texas who's a Longhorn fan would be behind. Nope. It's not as strong as the Manning name. So excited to see how Texas plays this year as they enter into the SEC officially on July 1st. But he's Locked On Longhorns host, Jonathan Davis. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, and on Twitter at Jonzo Ball, doing a great job covering Texas. Take a quick pause, wrap up the show here on Locked On Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150. Win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. And I know it's been a tough playoffs right now for the Carolina Hurricanes down there in Raleigh, but it's okay, guys. There's plenty of money to be made betting on the rest of the Stanley Cup playoffs and also betting on the NBA playoffs. Go out there, do that, and get your $150 in bonus bets over at FanDuel. What are you waiting for? Seriously, March 11th. It's been over 2 months now since we've had legal sports betting here in North Carolina. I tell you guys all the time, pretty much every show, to go over the FanDuel. So if you haven't done it, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Great stuff from Jonathan Davis, our Locked On Longhorns host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And that's great about Locked On. We have area, local experts all across the NFL, the NBA, NHL, every sport, college. Love so much to be able to get those guys on. We were able to get Andrew Lyon from Locked On Gamecocks on a couple weeks ago, getting Jonathan on today. That's awesome. And hoping to get some more people on. We don't have a Washington State podcast, but I do have someone who covers Washington State, is on the sidelines actually on game day for Washington State, who I'm hoping to link up with later on this week. And hopefully can talk to our Locked On Kentucky or Michigan host at some point. Don't have a Mississippi State podcast, so reaching out to try and find some people down there in Stark Vegas who can come on and talk about Jaden Crumity. But my hope is by the end of the month to be able to talk to people who have covered these players who have been drafted by Carolina, intensively have them on the show and get their perspective on what they bring to the Panthers. So appreciate Jonathan Davis and appreciate all of y'all on today's show today for checking it out. But it's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Yeah, be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays I'm here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Tuesday.